In a landmark moment for American governance, the United States Supreme Court recently delivered a narrow 5-4 decision that has sent ripples through the nation's political and legal landscape. This decision, while closely contested, is already being recognized as a pivotal point in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential power and the role of the judiciary in shaping national policy. The ruling carries major implications for both foreign aid and presidential authority, touching on issues that reach far beyond the immediate case at hand. At its core, the decision challenges the boundaries of executive action, especially when it comes to the allocation and distribution of billions of dollars in U.S. foreign assistance. The emergency order at the heart of this case addressed former President Donald Trump's controversial move to pause the release of $4 billion in foreign aid. This action, taken during a period of heightened global uncertainty, sparked intense debate among lawmakers, policy experts, and humanitarian organizations, all of whom questioned the legality and morality of withholding critical support from vulnerable populations abroad. The Supreme Court's ruling shines a spotlight on the ongoing tensions between the branches of government, particularly when it comes to financial governance and the separation of powers. The case has reignited discussions about the checks and balances that are fundamental to the American system, and whether any one branch should have unilateral control over such significant financial decisions. This case is not just about the money at stake, it's about the very nature of the balance of power between the president and Congress. The outcome could redefine how future presidents interact with lawmakers when it comes to setting priorities for U.S. engagement abroad, and it raises important questions about accountability and oversight in the highest levels of government. The stakes are incredibly high. Millions of people around the world depend on U.S. foreign aid for access to healthcare, food, education, and other essential services. For many, this aid is a lifeline, and any disruption can have immediate and devastating consequences. The Supreme Court's decision, therefore, is not just a matter of legal theory, it has real-world impacts on the lives of countless individuals and communities. The precedent set by this ruling could shape the direction of U.S. foreign policy for years to come. It will influence how future administrations approach the distribution of aid, and it may also affect the broader debate over executive authority and the role of the courts in checking presidential power. In this chapter, we'll explore the background of the aid freeze, the legal challenges that brought the issue before the Supreme Court, and what this historic ruling means for the future of U.S. foreign policy, the balance of power in Washington, and the millions of people whose lives depend on American assistance. On January 20, 2025, President Donald Trump was sworn in for his second term, marking a historic moment in American politics. The inauguration ceremony was filled with both celebration and tension as supporters gathered in Washington, D.C., and the world watched closely to see what direction the new administration would take. Almost immediately after the ceremony, President Trump moved swiftly to make his mark on U.S. policy, signaling that his second term would be just as bold and controversial as his first. Within hours of taking the oath of office, Trump signed an executive order that sent shockwaves through the international community. The order called for a comprehensive 90-day pause on all foreign aid disbursements, effectively freezing billions of dollars in assistance to countries and organizations around the globe. The White House press corps scrambled to understand the full implications as details of the order began to emerge. This dramatic move was framed as a key part of Trump's renewed America First initiative. The administration argued that it was time to take a hard look at where U.S. taxpayer dollars were going and whether those expenditures truly served the interests of the American people. Trump's supporters cheered the decision, seeing it as a long-overdue reassessment of America's global commitments, while critics warned of dire consequences for international stability and humanitarian efforts. The responsibility for carrying out the freeze fell to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was newly appointed and immediately thrust into the spotlight. Rubio and his team at the State Department, along with officials at USAID, were tasked with the complex job of halting all funding streams, reviewing existing contracts, and communicating the sudden change to partners around the world. The freeze affected a vast array of programs from disaster relief and health initiatives to economic development and education projects. The administration defended the freeze as a necessary step to ensure that every dollar spent overseas was advancing American priorities. Officials insisted that the pause would allow for a thorough review of all foreign aid programs, rooting out waste and inefficiency, and making sure that U.S. generosity was not being taken for granted. They emphasized that the move was not intended to permanently cut aid, but to make it more accountable and effective. However, the abruptness of the freeze left many aid organizations reeling. Nonprofits and international agencies that relied on U.S. funding suddenly found themselves in limbo, with projects halted midstream and staff uncertain about their futures. In countries already facing crises, such as famine, conflict, or disease outbreaks, the pause threatened to disrupt life-saving assistance and undermine years of progress. The executive order also raised immediate legal and humanitarian concerns. Advocacy groups and legal experts questioned whether the president had the authority to unilaterally withhold funds that Congress had already appropriated. Humanitarian organizations scrambled to assess the impact, convening emergency meetings and consulting with legal counsel to determine their next steps. The uncertainty created a sense of chaos in the aid community as everyone waited to see how the situation would unfold. As the days passed, it became clear that the freeze would not go unchallenged. Lawsuits were quickly filed and protests erupted outside courthouses and government buildings. The stage was set for a high-stakes legal battle over the limits of presidential power and the future of America's role in the world. The outcome would have far-reaching implications, not just for foreign aid, but for the balance of power between Congress and the White House. The announcement of the aid freeze sent shockwaves through advocacy groups and legal organizations across the country. Almost immediately, prominent groups such as the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition and HIS sprang into action, filing lawsuits in federal court. Their goal was clear: to challenge what they saw as an unlawful and abrupt halt to critical funding that had already been approved by Congress. These organizations argued that the freeze threatened not only vital programs but also the very principle of separation of powers enshrined in the Constitution. In their legal briefs, the plaintiffs contended that the president did not possess the authority to unilaterally block funds that Congress had already allocated. They emphasized that the Constitution grants Congress the power of the purse, and that executive interference undermined the checks and balances designed to prevent any one branch from overreaching its authority. Lawyers for the advocacy groups worked tirelessly, poring over legal precedents and preparing arguments that would be presented in courtrooms packed with reporters and concerned citizens. Presiding over the initial cases, U.S. District Judge Amir Ali became a central figure in the unfolding legal drama. Judge Ali issued a series of rulings that consistently sided with the plaintiffs, finding that the administration had indeed overstepped its bounds. In his written opinions, he stressed that the executive branch could not simply disregard the will of Congress, especially when it came to the allocation and distribution of federal funds. As a result of Judge Ali's decisions, the administration was ordered to release funds for projects and programs that had already been completed or were in progress. These rulings were seen as a victory for advocates and a reaffirmation of the judiciary's role in upholding constitutional boundaries. The government, however, continued to defend its actions, insisting that the pause was necessary to review spending and ensure accountability. The legal battle quickly became a high-profile confrontation between the executive and legislative branches, highlighting the ongoing tension over control of the federal budget. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill watched closely, with some members of Congress joining the lawsuits or filing amicus briefs in support of the plaintiffs. The case became a flashpoint in the broader debate over the limits of presidential power. While the administration maintained that the aid freeze was a temporary and necessary measure, the courts viewed it as a clear example of presidential overreach. Legal experts debated the implications on television and in op-eds, with many warning that allowing the freeze to stand could set a dangerous precedent for future administrations. Ultimately, the case made its way to the Supreme Court, where the justices would be tasked with deciding not only the fate of the aid freeze, but also the broader question of how much power the executive branch truly holds over federal spending. The outcome would have lasting implications for the balance of power in American government. The Supreme Court's 5-4 decision upheld lower court rulings against Trump's aid freeze. The majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts and joined by Barrett and the liberal justices, reaffirmed congressional authority over federal spending. They cited the Impoundment Control Act, which limits the president's ability to withhold funds. Dissenting justices, including Alito and Thomas, warned of judicial overreach into executive power. The ruling resolved the immediate aid issue and set a precedent for future disputes over presidential control of appropriated funds. It reinforced the judiciary's role as a check on executive authority. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 was central to the Supreme Court's ruling. Passed after Nixon's attempts to withhold funds, the ICA restricts how and when a president can delay or freeze spending. The president can only freeze funds for up to 45 days while Congress considers a rescission proposal. In Trump's case, the administration failed to follow these procedures, notably by not notifying both chambers of Congress simultaneously. This misstep was key in arguing the freeze was illegal. The ICA underscores the importance of legal procedures and the balance of power between Congress and the president. The foreign aid freeze sparked fierce debate. The Trump administration defended it as necessary to reassess priorities and ensure effective use of U.S. funds. Aid organizations argued the freeze caused harm to millions and violated the Impoundment Control Act. The administration claimed court intervention infringed on executive authority, while challengers said the courts were upholding the rule of law. The case highlighted not just legal issues but also the humanitarian stakes of U.S. foreign aid. These arguments reflect broader debates about America's role in the world and the limits of executive power. The freeze on $4 billion in aid had immediate, profound effects on organizations and vulnerable populations. Many programs were halted or scaled back, disrupting services from healthcare to education. For millions, U.S. aid is a lifeline, supporting vaccinations, clean water, and refugee shelter. The freeze threatened to cut off these resources, worsening crises in already struggling communities. Aid groups warned of irreversible harm and had to divert resources to legal battles and contingency planning. The situation exposed the fragility of relying on government funding. Ultimately, the freeze underscored the human cost of political and legal disputes. The Supreme Court's decision has major implications for U.S. law and the balance of power. By upholding congressional control over spending, the court set a precedent for future executive authority cases. The ruling highlights the judiciary's role in checking presidential power and the importance of legal frameworks like the ICA. It also reignited debate over America's global responsibilities versus domestic priorities. This case will have a lasting impact on U.S. governance and foreign policy. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point in the debate over executive power and congressional authority. It reinforces that the president must follow legal procedures when managing federal funds. The case may shape future foreign aid policy and America's global role. Policymakers are challenged to balance humanitarian needs with domestic priorities. The ruling is a reminder of the human impact of political decisions and the importance of upholding the rule of law. The future of U.S. foreign aid remains a critical issue in shaping the world.